You are listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So, if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or his Substack. Or simply buy him a coffee with a one-off donation, links to which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hey folks, it's been an absolutely amazing week. I've had the best conversations. I had Kemi, then I had the bowler hat farmer, I've had Nikita Stark, I've had Irina. It's just, I feel blessed that I've had these amazing conversations. And I've also launched my consultation service. And if you haven't already heard, it's about being acting as your health advocate, unpicking the jargon, explaining to you what your diagnosis means. If you've been to see a doctor, like most people, they go to a doctor, it's a rushed consultation. You leave with so many more questions than answers. So that's where I can help. I can help break down what that diagnosis means and what your treatment options are, and even maybe consider whether that's a correct diagnosis for you. I can empower you with information so that you know how to prepare for surgery. And make sure it's pain-free and successful and minimize complications post-op. I can help make sure you get informed consent. I can make sure that you're asking the right questions so that you get the correct answers. I can help with, a second opinion, making sure it's, really truly unbiased second opinion you're getting. You're not getting treatment or guidance based on, a monetary return and getting an operation just because it's lining someone's pocket, and so much more. And health coaching, advice on how to fast and whatever, interpreting tests, scans. I can help you. So I'm not acting as a doctor to treat you or diagnose you. I'm here as a health advocate to empower you with knowledge, because the better the knowledge, the better the decisions that you're going to make. And so far, I think next week is fully booked. It's been amazing, the response. And I can see that there's a demand for this. People are being shortchanged by the healthcare system and their clinicians. So folks, I'm here for you. If not today, tomorrow, or whenever. And on another note, the summer retreat is coming up. It's only about 6 weeks away, I think. We've sold over 3/4 of the tickets. There's only just a handful of tickets left. If you want to come and spend time with me and some amazing other people, have fantastic food, treatment sessions, and just a healing weekend of love and joy, book through my website, docmalik.com, retreats. And if you've got any queries, you can drop me an email at retreats@docmalik.com. Okay, folks, enjoy the show. There anymore, And like I said, when I'm switching between the two, that's what that means.
Which is which?
Doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about it. It's like, that's my problem. But listen, honestly, thank you for coming. I mean that, seriously. When I reached out to you and said, hey, the last episode, it'd be really nice you did face-to-face. And you're like, yeah, well, I'm coming. I was like, honestly, I was so excited. I was like, I really hope you say yes. So I know you come here, it's probably not very often. You've got lots of people to see. You're busy. You're flying around, and coming out here, seeing me, it's not easy. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
I mean that. It's just very different to see in the person. And the beard looks good on you, buddy.
Good.
But anyway, listen, before I talk about one of the pieces that's been written for Winter Oak, why is it called Winter Oak? I keep thinking of Winter Soldier. I don't know if you've seen this Marvel TV series and there's a Winter Soldier. Why is it called Winter Oak again? You did tell me. I can't remember now.
There was a personal story behind it. Well, there was been a few winter oaks in my life, actually. I was the garden where I was lived when I was a baby, big oak. I was born in the winter, and my mum told me later that they used to put me outdoors. It's good wisdom, I think. Time that babies outdoors in the winter, so they breathe proper air and stuff.
Fresh air.
So I was under a winter oak in my first months on this earth, and then later on I was where I worked. I used to go for a walk at lunchtime into the sun. The only place you could get the sun was up a hill where there was an oak tree. And I used to lean on this winter oak. I was going through a divorce at the time, so it was pretty grim times. This oak gave me a feeling of strength, where it was the oak and the sun together, actually, in the winter. I'll just stay there for 5 minutes, just sort of touch the tree and feel its solidity and timelessness. So
I love it. I love it. Just one sec. Right, great. Having been divorced, I know it can be tough, but some of the best people have been divorced. So it's like, what doesn't kill you make you stronger, doesn't it?
well, it certainly does, yeah.
But I reached the point where I realized I'd rather be single and happy than be with someone and be miserable, you know?
Yes, definitely.
So anyway, so now we know why it's called winter oak. That's great. I love oak trees as well. I love trees. I love nature. I said, while I was excited to have this conversation with you, I was feeling a bit sad because it meant I can't sit in my deck chair in the garden getting the sun, which I think is so healing for us.
Yes.
You know?
It is very important. And it's quite sad when you see people now, because they want to be looking at their phone or their laptop, they deliberately go and sit in the shade on a sunny spring day. I've seen that a bit last week or so.
Right.
It's very sad.
I'm like, get out. Like we haven't had the sun for 6 months and now you're like in the shade or indoors. Like, what are you doing? Get out there. Anyway, let's move on to one of the articles. Like Winter Oak is your website and you've got lots of great pieces on there. You've got someone called Mike Driver recently wrote a paper, an article, 50 observations from inside the belly of modernity. Oh God, I love that. I mean, that is a work of art, isn't it?
It is. It is. As soon as he sent it to me, I said, rarely have I seen so many gems of wisdom washed up on the same beach of writing. It's very good. It's very good. It must have taken me a while to have put together all those little thoughts.
What was really good about it was the fact that it's really it's just bullet points numbered. But the thing is, every word means something. There's no wasteful words there. There's no superfluous garbage. It's just to the point. I mean, I'll just read out a few so people get a gist. And there's 50 of them. Number one, if a politician of any stripe is speaking, even if truth, it will be in the service of a greater lie. 2, everything you see, everything you hear, and everything you feel via the glass of mass media, even if true, is in service of the lie. 3, any accuracies in history are in service of the lie. 4, the only consideration guiding the behavior of multinational corporations is profit. 5, all global crises are wealth and power transfers in disguise. And it goes on and on and on. And the truth is, like, if people just read that and understood, can you imagine the level of global consciousness being raised? I mean, that's how we fight back, isn't it? Ultimately, like, people just understand what's happening and what's at stake and stop playing along.
Yes, we do have to do that. Sometimes it's a daunting task because people seem so uninterested and uneducated and closed. A lot of people out there, they seem to be to me. So we need to find ways of communicating to them. And I think writing beautiful, not too lengthy articles like that is a good start. You can grab someone's attention without forcing them to spend 30 minutes wading through lots of detail, which is sometimes the case with my own articles, I have to admit.
But I get that, mate. Because sometimes you need the deep dive to really break down the layers of propaganda and crap. Like, they're so good at manipulating. It's like Mark Twain said, it's just easier to fool someone than to make them realize they've been fooled. It's a lot harder once the deed is done. It's like, basically, look, it's very easy to eat a Mars bar. You can eat it in 30 seconds, but that's 30 minutes on a treadmill to burn it off. Or you could spend a week earning your cash and then click it away online shopping in literally a minute. It's just like that. It's just the scales are tipped away from us. So I think it's very easy to propagandize and brainwash people. It's just very difficult to break through all that and wake people up. That's what's hard.
It is. Yeah, you do need facts to persuade people. Otherwise, it's just an opinion. But you need both, actually. You need to be able to express yourself poetically sometimes, and reach people's heart. And at other times you need to reach their brain and say, and show them that it's not just an opinion. And what I say isn't my theory about what's going on. It's what I've marshaled the evidence to show is actually going on, often from the words of the people who are doing it or on their websites. I think that is essential. If you're going to actually persuade anybody that what you're saying is correct, you've got to give them some sort of hard factual evidence to demonstrate that, haven't you?
Yeah, 100%. But I think we need to adopt some of the lessons that we learn from the enemy. So what I mean by that is it's not just hard facts and statistics that's going to win in the day. It's stories, it's satire, it's humor. We need to be really smart and clever about it. And that's why I'm always thinking in my head, how do I do the podcast? How do I help get people like your voices out there, and the message out there? And I kind of like realize that just giving hard facts and data, people switch off. They run away from that. It's kind of a combination of everything.
Yeah. Yes, you need it. You need all of it. I try to present the facts in a sort of in the form of a narrative, or it's not just it's not just lists of things, historical incidents that I've discovered. I try to make it a good read as well as far as I'm able. So.
Yeah, but what we're doing ultimately, you as a writer, me as a podcaster and writer, is like we're trying to make people aware. We're selling them information and empowering them with that information. And the problem is the enemy uses tactics that are unethical and not moral, and they use fear, and they know from their behavioral research what makes humans tick, and they use that to their advantage to manipulate people, and the war is on the mind. But us being ethical people, good people, we don't do that. We don't use fear or unethical practices to manipulate people and plant seeds in their head and make them think thoughts that aren't their thoughts. So we're playing clean where they're playing dirty. When, for example, even like when it comes to selling things, companies and advertisers will use fear and behavioral manipulation. Whereas, for example, I've been organizing a summer retreat, and I've got a few tickets left to sell. But I'm not using fear and coercion. I'm just saying, hey guys, join me on my summer break and spend time with me and some amazing people. I'm selling hope and love. Whereas, unfortunately, quite often it's fear and all the negative stuff that actually is most powerful. But we need to fight clean.
We do, but it's easier to do so when you're actually trying to present the truth rather than lies. They have to manipulate because it's a load of fibs what they're trying to persuade us of. But if you're just opening somebody's eyes to the truth, you don't have to think about any sort of dodging around and how you're going to present it so they believe you. I think that if people recognize the truth when they hear it, when it's presented to them in a clear way, I think we've got a sort of inner moral compass that we recognize if something's true and if it's right and wrong. And so on our side of this struggle, we don't need to resort to their tricks, even if we were capable of doing it, which we're probably not because we've not been trained in behavioral sciences or propaganda techniques and the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we set up the camera and I started recording, I was saying to you how I've got many hats. And it's not, I'm a doctor, I'm a surgeon, I'm a former orthopedic surgeon, and I'm a podcaster, I'm a writer, I'm a dad. It's very important. You said something very profound about identity. Do you want to just repeat that? I really liked what you said.
Well, we were saying that if somebody identifies with their job to the point that is them and they see themselves as nothing more than that, it's very dangerous if you lose your job because you've lost yourself at the same time. Whereas if you know that you are just somebody who's doing that job, but you're a whole person that just happens to be employed for the meantime in that job, then you can cope with losing it. Your world doesn't collapse.
It's beautiful. And that I think that is the problem with doctors. That for most doctors, doctor surgeons, their identity is that. And that's why if they get into trouble and they lose their license or whatever, they get suspended, they fight tooth and nail in the dirty kangaroo court, system where they get into a boxing ring with their eyes blindfolded and their arms tied behind their back. They'll still climb into that boxing ring, even though they know they're going to get wiped clean. Because they want to keep that identity. They don't know anything else. And I think that's really sad,
It is sad, and it's maybe that does help to explain why so few of your former colleagues spoke out during the COVID period, because it was quite a betrayal of the country and of the world, wasn't it? The deafening silence from the profession that was in a position to tell the truth and to put the record straight.
Yeah. I'm glad you say that, because I felt very disappointed and dismayed at my colleagues in my profession. And some people might be like, well, they're no different from any other human beings. And I'm like, yeah, they are. They're just like everyone else. They are human beings. However, they're trained as medical doctors, as healers. They're taught about medical ethics. They should know about informed consent and first do no harm, which is more than, for example, the guy who's doing some paving in my garden knows about. He's human, but he doesn't really know much about medical ethics. He's not taught about it. He'll have a rough idea, maybe about consent, but the nitty-gritty details and the importance of it, no, doctors do. Doctors should be like the guardians of medical ethics. That's their bread and butter. And for them to just simply disregard it, I just found shocking. It's just like, what the hell?
Yeah. You're right that they're not the only profession that has some responsibility. I mean, as a former professional journalist, I have to say that my former colleagues in that profession were pretty appalling. Well, I have been for a long time, actually, in the mainstream, the national, international media. I only worked on a small local paper, so there was still a reasonable notion of ethics on that local scale. But professional journalism is supposed to be about telling truth and holding power to account, and the rest of it, in theory. But we don't see a lot of that now, do we? To be honest.
Yeah, it's really funny you should give that example, and that's because of your own experience. But I was thinking of journalism as I was thinking of my medical colleagues. I was thinking, where were they looking for the truth and examining it? And what has happened to journalism? Why do you think that's the case? I think with regards to medicine, and people have heard it on my podcast, I won't go on about it too much, but it's the centralization of control, guidelines and protocols, the groupthink, the indoctrination through medical school, the Rockefeller medicine system. I mean, there's lots of different reasons, but basically the guidelines and protocols have stripped away any autonomy and freedom of thought that doctors might have had. It's just got really bad. What's happened in the world of journalism?
Well, from my experience, it was a similar thing. The paper that I worked for, when I joined it, was an independent family firm. And so it was editorial independent. And I think the owner valued the news content of the news. I think that's why it was there. I think it was set up to provide news, and the advertising paid for the paper to exist. But little by little, the emphasis shifted, and it was clear that the journalism was just there to fill the pages, and it eventually got taken over by bigger and bigger companies. I'd lost track in the end of who owned it. It was some sort of anonymous sort of entity on the city that owned it, and all they were interested in was yield and money and profit, and they gradually cut back the number of journalists. The internet was a great boost, and email, because they started pouring readers' contributions straight in to the paper without we used to receive printed press releases, and then you'd phone somebody up and have a conversation with them. And of course, this took far too many journalists and too much expenditure on behalf of the company. So it was just like, well, they called it user-generated content. That was the big thing that they were on about in my last few years. I mean, it's been more than 10 years since I left the profession, so I don't know what the state is in now. Which is just free stuff. Free. We don't pay anyone for this. Somebody wants to publicise their event or whatever it is, they'll just send us something, and it'll go straight in, and the council will send us something. go straight in. We used to make a point of always asking for opinions of other people on everything. Some politician made a statement or the council made a statement. You go to the opposition, go to somebody you know to be critical of the of the institution on that particular point. You'd get a balanced article, which is what it was supposed to be. That seemed to gradually go out the window, and it was just council press releases and the like going pretty much straight into the paper without being rewritten. Which isn't journalism, is it?
We're just regressing so badly, aren't we?
Yeah.
In every field, in every discipline, in every profession, we're just going backwards.
Yeah. It's the reign of quantity, as René Guénon, the philosopher, put it, which is he was describing the modern age, where quality was no longer any importance; it's just pure quantity.
Lord help us.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I've tried to do in my podcast is weave together collect as many of the jigsaw puzzles and build a picture of what's actually going on in the world. And, what I've found since I started doing the podcast is there's a lot of people who focus on one thing. They become an expert on one thing. And they almost get captured by that, in the sense that they're biased in their worldview, in that they think their thing is the thing and the most important thing. And if everybody understood it, then everything would be fixed. Whether it's there's no viruses, or it's all 5G, or it's all about chemtrails, or it's whatever. And I'm not saying these things are not important. They are, but people just fixate on, like, that's it. It's the Rothschilds family, or it's the Rockefeller family, or it's Agenda 2030, or, it's the disparate little things, when actually I think they're all connected, whether it's stakeholder capitalism and communitarianism and WEF goals and Agenda 2030 and sustainability. Everything's linked. Banking, BIS. Actually, no one really talks about Bank of International Settlements so much. What's your thing, or are you looking at the bigger picture as well?
I am looking at the bigger picture, but I think I've come to the conclusion that the Rothschild family are indeed very important. They're not really a detail. They're very central through the control of the banking system primarily. But, this is a difficult thing to say, because it sounds quite narrow to say that the Rothschilds are behind everything. I know people say, well, yeah, but you just mentioned the Rockefellers as well. But when I looked into the Rockefellers, and historically they were in secret talks with the Rothschilds at the end of the 19th century, and I'm pretty sure that the Rockefeller entity has been pretty much a front for the Rothschilds one since then. And recently I decided to sort of test this opinion, conclusion that I'd drawn from historical reading, by looking at the Rockefeller Foundation and its board of trustees. Because if it's a slightly different thing to the Rothschilds, you should be able to see that. You should be able to see distinct affiliations and circles to do with its trustees. But I found exactly the opposite. It was all the same connections as you have with all the rest of the empire of the Rothschilds and the WF and the UN and the banks, and particularly Zionism. Because you wouldn't, in theory, people's version of what the Rockefellers do, they shouldn't be too linked to Israel and Zionism.
So I spoke to someone from the Rockefellers, and they were saying all their money's in a foundation and they don't really control that much of it. I was like, wow, I was quite shocked. But let's go back to the name, the Rothschilds and whatnot. So there's a writer called Mary A.F. You ever heard of her?
Yeah.
She says, if you know their name, they're in the game. And I'm like, well, a lot of people know her name. So, is she in the game? So I don't know if I fully buy into that. And I wonder, like, for example, if you know their name, are they really the evil ones? Because I think the really evil ones, we don't know who they are. The real, intergenerational families that are doing this to us. Some people like Francis Leader will talk about the black nobility, the 13 families, and this and that. I don't know who these people are. Catherine Austin Fitz recently was on Tucker Carlson. and she just describes them as the banksters.
But the bank,
But who are these people?
well, the banksters, the banks, it's the Rothschild empire. I mean, it's not. I mean, yes, we've heard of them. Of course, we've heard of them. They're the most powerful people in the world. And 100 or more years ago, people knew that they were the kings of the banking system and kings of the world, and all the heads of state bowed down before them. There were cartoons about it in publications and things. They were very high profile, but they realised they were too high profile. And so they've continued, but by hiding their power. And one of the ways they do it is by putting around memes like that. Oh no, if you've heard of us, it can't be us, And it's just a cliche to talk about the Rothschilds. It means you haven't looked hard enough. There are these hidden powers. Like some people say, it's the royal family or the royal families of Europe and the old aristocracy who are hiding behind the idea that they're being controlled by the Rothschilds and banksters. Well, why would they do that? Why would they? What does that make us think more of them? The fact that they might be controlled by...
Yeah, like these families, like the Orsini family and all that kind of stuff. What do you think of all these people?
Well, I've heard this, but I've never come across them. I've done years of looking into all these networks now, and they don't come up. What comes up is Israel a lot of the time, Zionism and the banking system, and the arms trade, and it's all this and Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola and.
Okay, hold on, stop 1 second. So how does Pepsi Cola tie in with Zionism and Israel and, tell me all that kind of stuff?
Well, I haven't researched them in particular, but they're one of the companies that always comes up. And people work for Pepsi. Pepsi Cola are often partners of these WF or Rockefeller type institutions. I recognize the same names all the time. All the time, everywhere I look, the same corporations come up, and we know that they're all ultimately owned. People have done research and found that nearly everything is owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and it's very difficult to find out who owns them because they sort of own each other.
Yeah,
yeah.
And apparently BlackRock is owned 40% by Merrill Lynch, but Merrill Lynch doesn't have a seat on the board, and that seems really weird. You've got the biggest share of BlackRock, but you're not on the board. Why would you do that? That doesn't even make sense.
No, but it's just devices. It's devices to hide what's going on. All of these holding companies, and it's something that's been perfected over the years. But as far as BlackRock is concerned, it's not me saying this, but Dr. Joseph Mercola has said that it looks as if the Rothschilds are behind it. BlackRock and Vanguard, I think, and all of those, and that wouldn't surprise me, because what has happened is that it's like if we're playing a real life game of Monopoly, the board game.
Yes,
which I know was actually invented originally in order to warn people of the dangers of monopolies.
But do you know why I hate Monopoly? Because the game just gets miserable in the end.
Yeah,
because you can't win.
Can't win. Somebody owns everything, and you just trail around the board.
Absolutely. Getting your £200 free cash, and it's like, well, it's miserable. It's like, I don't want to do this anymore. And every single time we've ever played Monopoly, literally halfway through it, we just get fed up, pissed off, and just walk away. And you don't leave the game going, oh, that was such a good, fun game. You just feel bitter and like, what was the point of that? It's pointless. It's just luck at the end of the day, and someone just accumulates everything.
Yeah, exactly. And we're now at that. I think for some time we've been at that point where it's not fun anymore, and somebody's got all the money and all the hotels,
Park Lane, Mayfair, and even old Whitechurch Road, whatever it's called.
Whitechapel, wasn't it?
Whitechapel. That's it. Whitechapel.
Yeah, I know. We're just we're not really playing. We're just there. So we just walk away from it and go and play a different game, a more rewarding game for everybody, not one where the only person who enjoys it is the one who's
got everything.
Yeah.
So listen, look, I know you talk about Zionism quite a lot and Israel. I'd love you to unravel in your brain why you feel passionate about it. In my head, I really struggle because I just don't get it. I just don't get Israel. I don't get Zionism. I don't understand how they've captured the Jewish population, because what a lot of people don't realize is for the longest time, most Jews did not like Zionism. They were not supporters of it. They were in Europe. They were in America. They felt European. They felt French. They felt British, American. That's why they were there. They were incorporated into the country. Just the way I, this brown person, I'm living in England. I feel this is my home. I don't want to go anywhere else. I don't feel like I have a homeland that I need to belong to. And most Jews actually believed that for the longest time. And then Zionism came along and said, no, we need a special homeland. And it was predicated on the fact that you're never going to be welcome or be part of this country. You know, you can only feel safe if you have your own homeland. And a lot of people said, we don't want to go to the Middle East. Thank you very much. We're quite happy in Paris or wherever. So that's why there's a lot of resistance amongst Jews. But that all kind of changed with the Second World War and what happened and the narratives that came around that, you're not safe. You're not safe, folks. And that's why, Israel was set up. But what is that? Because you've got all these people now who are openly Zionists, who aren't necessarily Jewish, maybe agnostic, atheist, could be even Christian Zionists. You've got Jews that don't believe in Zionism, but you've got a lot of Jews that do believe in Zionism. There's a lot of people in the American government who have dual nationality, Israel and America, and are openly Zionist. Who's calling the shots? Is Zionism the tail and the dog is something else? Or is that little Israel now calling all the shots? I struggle to understand what is happening and who's calling the shots. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
I know that's a big question, but I just don't understand the whole thing. I just think it's so murky. And then you throw in things like anti-Semitism, and then that means that you have to tiptoe around everything because in case you get called anti-Semitic, which is just ridiculous. It's just so stupid. But what are you passionate about, and what are your thoughts about what's happening?
Well, I can see the way that anti-Semitism, the threat of anti-Semitism, is used in two distinct ways by the ruling criminocracy, I call them, the people that run this world. Because it is a criminal organisation.
Total mafia, yeah.
It's mafia. And they use it in two ways. First of all, they obviously it's to discredit anybody who criticises what they're doing because they are, it's a Zionist mafia. It's a globalist and Zionist mafia, and anyone who criticises them is immediately labelled anti-Semitic, and that's supposed to shut you up. Secondly, it is used as a weapon against the Jewish diaspora because it's, as she was just saying, it's used to frighten them into supporting Big Brother, the Zionist Big Brother, the Godfather, their system, because they're telling them that everybody hates Jewish people and that they need protection. It's like a sort of protection racket being run against the Jewish people. I don't think this mafia has the interests of Jewish people as a whole at heart.
I don't think so.
And I don't know enough about Judaism to know. I mean, there's lots of different strands of Judaism which I don't know about. But I don't think they're really religious in the sense that most people would understand it either. It's more of a tribal identity, and they don't care about the little Jews any more than the old aristocrats and royal families of Europe cared about their own peasants, their own little people. They're all just serfs. They're cannon fodder. Send them out to the wars, and you don't care if they get killed or not. And I suspect the same relationship really exists between this Zionist mafia and Jewish people. And I think it'd be quite a useful thing to be able to do would be for Jewish people to start raising awareness within their own communities of the fact that they're being manipulated, and to disassociate themselves from it. I mean, obviously some already have. But
I think that's a really good example. And I think another example is, for example, when I was a captain in the reserves, I signed up for Queen and Country. And you have this idea that, you're just whipped up, this patriotism, this, support of your armed forces and your country. But you're not. Like, you have this, you're brainwashed into thinking you're fighting a good cause and this is for you, when actually you're just cannon fodder, when actually you're just mercenary forces for the globalists and their corporations. And I think a lot of good Jews have been brainwashed into thinking that Zionism is their fight and their cause, and it's really important for them. when in actual fact it's damaging for them and harmful for them, just like it is for any young man joining the army. It's not good for you. The army is there to use you and sacrifice you for globalist corporations. It's got nothing to do with defending the country and the border. It's not these romantic Second World War movies. You are being brainwashed to sacrifice your life potentially for money at the end of the day, and geopolitics. And I think a lot of Jews are being manipulated, just like these young soldier recruits, to sign up to Zionism when actually it's got nothing to do with them and it's not beneficial to them. Do you think that's reasonable?
I think that's true, yeah. And sometimes I wonder whether it is a fake cause, really. I mean, nationalism generally is used, as you say, is used to do that, to make people fight wars. And all the American soldiers that died protecting the corporate empire that was represented by America, but it was nothing to do with Americans.
Like Vietnam War. Like what did that have to do with them? Like the Korean War. I mean, we could go on and on. All these wars that Americans go off and die in. I mean, I know native people in the Middle East also die and Vietnamese died, but just think about the Americans. Like, did the American presidents care about their young boys going off and being killed and coming back as amputees? No, of course they didn't. You know, they used them, didn't they?
Yes, they did use them. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I do think, yeah, the same is true. Maybe in the same way as American imperialism and British imperialism are really just fronts for the mafia, for the global mafia, and thus incite people in those countries to support their imperialism, because it seems to be a question of their national glory or well-being. French Empire as well, the same would be true. Maybe the same is true of Zionism in Israel. The people within Israel are being manipulated into thinking this is a nationalistic cause that they're being asked to fight for, whereas in fact it's just it's just the mob using that flag to rally people behind its own agenda.
So one of the things about the Rothschilds, you could say, look, they've only been around for about 250 years. Oh, well, the empires before, what about like the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Venetians? You know, it wasn't the Rothschilds behind those people. So, you know, aren't there other bad people that have just been around a long time and mutating? Like, you know, like I said, there's some people say that it goes back to the Babylonian era, these families, you know.
Yeah, and obviously nothing started with that particular family, but you have to see them in a larger context. Also, I mean, what has happened is that they were one of many players to start with. They were extraordinarily successful. They called off a number of major coups, financial coups and successes. It was like we were just talking about with the board game of Monopoly. They were one of many players, but then they gained an upper hand, and because of the nature of our society, once you've gained a certain amount of money, a certain important tipping point of money, suddenly, the whole world opens up and nobody can stop you, because with your money, you buy more money and you control more people. And with the control, you exert more and more power. But it's also important to realize that they're particularly ruthless. They weren't just businessmen doing a good deal, or, far-sighted economic planners. They're literally a criminal group.
Can you give an example?
Well, they were involved during the Napoleonic Wars. They were involved in contraband, and they took advantage of the bans on trading with continental Europe in order to run black market operations. And that sort of thing has continued until recent days. Like in the there's two very interesting books I read a few years ago by an author called Jim McGregor and another author called Jerry Doherty. Two books about the First World War, which I would recommend to anybody, as well as their latest book, but I won't go into that for the moment. And they talk, for one of the many strands of profiteering. And
it's up there somewhere.
Is it?
Yeah. Behind me in my bookshelf. Emmy Karen.
One of the details in this story about the First World War, which they explain was engineered deliberately by the but was essentially by the Rothschildian mafia and the people that they roped into working for them. One of the details was the Belgium Relief Fund, and this was a massive scam. It was a massive scam. People were giving money thinking that it was to help starving Belgian people. They weren't really starving, and nobody knows where all the money went. And a lot of the aid ended up going to feed the Germans, thus keeping the war going, because if the Germans had been starved into submission, the war wouldn't have been long enough to make all the profits that they were hoping it would make. I mean, that's criminal behaviour in itself, to start a war deliberately. I mean, you can't get much more criminal than that. And when you add on all the stuff that they're also involved in, I mean, we all know about the Jeffrey Epstein network and the British royal family. Prince Andrew was connected to that. The Rothschilds are connected to Epstein.
Are they?
Yeah. And he was working for Israeli intelligence, as was Ghislaine Maxwell and her father. And then you look at Prince Charles, who's connected, great friend of the Rothschilds. There's that wonderful photograph of him being poked in the chest by a Rothschild. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've seen that one, yeah.
And of course, Prince Charles was a great friend of Jimmy Savile, who was protected by Keir Starmer when Keir Starmer was director of public prosecutions. And Keir Starmer goes to the same North London synagogue as the Rothschild family. So it's all...
Are you kidding?
No, that's true, yeah.
Because he's married someone Jewish.
Yeah, so that's why he goes to the synagogue. He's bringing up his family as in the Jewish faith, as I understand it. And it's the North London liberal synagogue, I think. It's well known as the Rothschilds' local synagogue. So...
And so, okay, fine. Let's talk about Zionism. What is your issue with Zionism?
My issue is not with Zionism per se. Actually, it's with the.
It's just that a lot of your writings, you talk about Zionism, and tell me, like, why?
I think, well, there's two things. One of them is that obviously, through years of research, I've realised that the global mafia is run by the Rothschilds and is deeply linked to the thing we call Zionism. Although, as I say, I've got some doubts as to whether it is what it says it is. I don't think Zionism isn't just a sort of Jewish nationalism, the right of the state of Israel to exist. It goes beyond that, what I'm describing. I did actually write a piece where I had an updated version of a definition of Zionism.
Isn't it Zim, the Zio-imperialist mafia?
Yeah, that was a later... that's my shorthand for the mafia. But also I did write a piece about explaining what I thought Zionism was, that it's a little bit more than just the right of the state of Israel to exist. It's also the sort of silencing of all criticism of the Rothschilds or of the banksters and so on. It's become an entity that is separate from any particular nation state, which actually controls most nations, unfortunately, now. I'm including Britain, obviously, and America and France and Germany and so on, and probably Russia and China. When you look at their policies, they're all pushing in the same direction. They're all pushing towards this technocratic global state with 24-hour surveillance, a digital prison, digital currency, everything. Everybody has to be online all the time. They're going to push us into smart cities, and this is all coming back from this same entity, which I've identified as being Zionist in the sense that I describe. So obviously, that's important. It's important to know who these people are that are pushing this. It also explains, because there's this sort of, it's Jewish supremacism, isn't it? Effectively, what they do, what they're putting forward, and it strikes me that as a white person, I made a moral or political, ethical decision to be against white supremacism. But you, for example, you don't have to think about it. You couldn't support a belief system that regards you as inferior and somebody whose life doesn't matter.
No,
it's not even a question. So the same thing really should apply to Jewish supremacism.
And is there Jewish supremacism?
Yes, this is what we're saying. Zionism, in the sense of what I was describing of it being an offence. It's been seen as a political offence, and they're trying to make it a criminal offence to to even suggest that there is something wrong with the state of Israel, just simply the state of Israel, let alone describing all these criminocratic structures that are.
It's a great cover to hide behind, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just such a wonderful thing to hide behind. You can do all this bad stuff, and the moment you start saying, hey, why are you doing this bad stuff? You go, you're anti-Semitic. And it's like, what? You know, I don't know where I heard it. I think, oh God, someone was saying it's not good enough that you don't believe in anti-Semitism. You have to be actively anti-Semitism. And it was like, what? Like, what? And it's like, yeah, criticizing. Oh, and there was a podcast with Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan, and it was infuriating. This guy just puts on his little posh English accent and thinks he's smart. And it's just, he just uses so many false arguments. You know, it's unbelievable. Little tricks of debate, straw man tactics, you know, all that kind of stuff. False fallacies of logic. It's just nonsense he spouts. But for example, you know, he goes, someone mentions someone and he goes, oh, Paul Wolfowitz. I think it was Dave Smith, the comedian, goes, oh yeah, there was neocons like Paul Wolfowitz. And he goes, oh, that's such an anti-Semitic trope. And he was like, Dave Smith was like, what's that got to do with it? I'm saying that this guy, Paul Wolfowitz, is a bad guy and he's a neocon and wants wars in the Middle East and stuff. And he goes, oh yeah, but you know, it's his name, Wolfowitz, you know, it's such a great name, is it? Wolf, and then it's like a bad wolf, and you know, it's just an anti-Semitic trope type of thing. And this is the kind of conversation that was going on. And it was like,
It's ridiculous.
What the hell are you talking about? We're talking about this guy. It doesn't matter if his name was Paul Bagnall, Paul Bilal, Paul whatever. Like, the guy's not a good guy. We should be able to say he's not a good guy who's advocating wars abroad and he's got an imperialist agenda and he's a neocon. Who cares about whether he's Jewish or not? No one's mentioned that. But it's like, oh, you've raised his name, that means you're anti-Semitic. And then this is what I mean by it's a cover. It's a cover for shutting down any debate, anything, and discrediting you. Because the next thing is, are you anti-Semitic? And then it follows, are you a Holocaust denier? And you know, there's something you're on your back foot. You're having to defend yourself. You're having to get away from the argument that you're pushing. And suddenly you're just defending yourself that you're not a crazy person. You're not a bad person. You're not a hateful person. You're not Hitler. It's like suddenly the conversation just takes a life of its own. And you're like, what the hell? I was just saying that this person's not a good person. I don't give a damn what their religion is. But this is a weaponization that's taken place.
It is. And it is also a bit of a giveaway, in my opinion. That, it's been said, I've seen it said, that anybody who criticizes or suggests that there is such thing as a sinister, secretive global power, you know, whether or not they suggest that this is Jewish or not, that is in itself an anti-Semitic meme or trope, you know. So it's, but why would it be? Why would it be if it isn't? You know, I think it's becoming ridiculously obvious now. I mean, even with the Jeremy Corbyn thing. I mean, he's been widely dismissed across the British media, as far as I can understand, although I was already living in France at the time, as being anti-Semitic. But he's clearly not. He's a sort of he's a lifelong anti-racist, like, you know, all those sort of people on the left of the Labour Party, and a lot of his colleagues who've been thrown out of the Labour Party since are even Jewish, and they're still considered anti-Semitic if they criticise Israel. You know, and Ken Loach was described as anti-Semitic, and you know, this is just sort of left-wing, internationalist, non-racist people. But it's just the fact that they're challenging the establishment power, and because that establishment itself, I think, obviously is well aware that it is Zionist, it feels empowered to dismiss criticism of itself as being so-called anti-Semitic, which doesn't, you know, which it isn't anti-Semitic. It might be anti-Zionist. It's certainly against the Zim, as I call it, the Zionist global mafia. But it's becoming obvious now, and especially with what's been happening since October 2023, and the impunity that Israel seems to enjoy. I mean, Israel's been aided by the British Armed Forces and the air base in Cyprus. And, Israeli officials, Netanyahu, have been flying through the airspace of all these countries that are supposed to be upholding international law. And yet he's supposed to be arrested as a potential war criminal. And, and the BBC continues to paint this ridiculous image of a picture of it, this being a war that's going on in Palestine. On one side is little children being blown up in their beds, and on the other side is Israeli warplanes and drones, the rest of it. And it's grotesque to me what has been happening over the last year and a half. It's grotesque that we've been hearing for so many decades about how something like a genocide should never be allowed to happen again, and yet here it is. It's happening in all the governments and the media that have been spouting this fake humanitarianism, this fake concern for so long, are suddenly silent or complicit and not holding those currently responsible for genocide, a mass murder going on now, and not holding them to account, and are even accusing those who do so of being the bad guys. Like you were saying, they're the anti-Semites.
But this is the playbook, the complete inversion everywhere. So, for example, I mean, there's so many hypocrisies, so many. There's too many to list. Too many. But let's just do a recent example. So, Ukraine starts to bomb civilians in the east who have declared independence or autonomy because they wanted to maintain their Russian language and faith. And the Ukrainian government, which is backed by the Americans and the EU, is pushing them to get rid of the Russian language, their culture, everything. And like anybody, anywhere in the world, they resist this. And then the Ukrainian army goes in and starts bombing and shelling and killing the people of Donetsk and Lugansk. And after several years of this, reluctantly, Russia then joins in to defend these people. Russia isn't bombing innocent civilians in Kiev or Lviv or whatever, or Odessa. It's fighting armed forces. But the West has portrayed Russia as Hitler, Putin as Hitler. These horrible Russians, Ruskies, are invading Ukraine. We need to stand by Ukraine. We need to give them billions and billions and billions of weapons and money and ammunition and whatnot. And it's like, that's not true. That's a lie. And then, and there is no genocide. Russia's not doing any genocide in Ukraine. They're fighting armed forces of Ukraine to defend civilians in the east of Russia. That is the actual conflict. And it's portrayed as the Russians are bad and we need to defend the Ukrainians, who are often backed by neo-Nazis, and especially originally. And now in Israel, you have a real advanced army bombing thousands of civilians, devastating their homes, their schools, their places of worship, like carpet bombing the whole place to the point where it's just everything is rubble. And still, now the aggressor is portrayed as the victim. And if you empathize or sympathize for the Palestinian people who are being mass slaughtered, you're a terror sympathizer. I mean, what the fuck? It's a complete inversion of reality.
It is.
What the
It leaves you almost speechless, doesn't it?
Speechless.
I don't know how they can get away with it. Well, I do know how they get away with it because they control everything. They control the media and the whole system. So I don't think they've got away with it in the hearts and the minds of many millions of people, and so I think it's a good moment to speak about this Zionist global mafia. That's why I'm doing it now, because I think if we don't speak out against it in 2024 and 2025, when they're carrying out this at the very least ethnic cleansing, most people call it a genocide. They're certainly getting rid of all the Palestinians that have been living in Gaza and obviously want to reclaim it as part of Israel. If we don't speak out against it now, when are we going to?
So 100%. So There's two things I want to talk about. One, I talked about medicine, how it's very difficult for people to call out their own in their tribe. Medicine, they don't call out the wrongs that are happening. They just, I just don't know what, it's just like you feel like you're letting down your team or your guild or whatever. You'd rather not talk about it in front of other people. It's like, it's your own dirty laundry. You don't want to air it in public. I don't know. It's something like that, but it's wrong. Like if, as a doctor, if you're seeing something wrong happening in your profession, you should speak out. But I think it's human nature not to do that. And I think a lot of Jews find the same conundrum. They find it difficult to call out what's being done by other Jews. But that's not to say it's completely like that. I've seen now lots of Jews on Instagram, on social media, where they're protesting and they're saying not in our name, whether it's in New York or Brooklyn or here, but they don't get the airtime. They don't get the airtime. I've got also Jewish friends in private who will tell me that they totally think this is wrong and they don't believe in Israel and they think everything is barbaric and evil. And I say, do you talk about this? They go, well, if I go in the synagogue, they just think I'm crazy. They say, shut up. I am a minority. Most of my friends and family fall for the propaganda. They are themselves victims of the propaganda. And the propaganda for a lot of people, not just Jewish, is that Muslims are evil. They want to take over the world. They're barbaric. They're misogynistic. They're rapists. They're child abusers. They're pedophiles. They're uncultured. They have no music. They have no art. They have no food. And you know what? They're subhuman. And they want to just murder the West and take it over and make everything a caliphate. So you know what? Fuck them. If they die, who gives a f? Do you know what? My friend, Dan Levi, great lawyer, culture. I'm making an example up. He looks like me. He talks like me. I can identify with him. Mohammed bin al-Sad or whatever. Fuck him and his family. I don't give a shit. I think that's what ultimately, subconsciously, is what's happening. This is the programming that's taking place.
Hi, me again. You're listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or on his Substack, or simply buy him a coffee with one of the donation links which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get back to the show.
Definitely. And I've noticed that was deliberately been put in place over the last 20 years or so. I think it was 25 years, I suppose now. I think it was deliberately done in order to provide cover for Israel, for what they're doing now. They knew they were going to be doing this at some point. Maybe they didn't know exactly what year they'd be doing it, but they realized there'd be a reaction in Europe and elsewhere. So they had to make British and French people and elsewhere sympathize with the Israelis and in seeing Muslims as being terrorists that want to attack them, and all that you just described,
just as the Jews were during Germany. You othered them.
Yeah.
Isn't that, or COVID, the unvaccinated, you othered the group.
Yeah.
You dehumanized them.
And I noticed the switch taking place around, I think it was about 2000, I suppose it was around about the time of 9/11. But before you didn't see that. I remember the BBC had a sort of Muslim week or something like that. They were, talking about Muslim culture and, the establishment wasn't noticeably, in my mind, anti-Muslim at that point. And then, of course, with 9/11, which we pretty much know was not carried out by Muslims, as they tried to tell us, and then that started a whole series of events. And I've read some stuff about London's bombings in 2005 as well, and it looks like that was very dodgy as well, and probably wasn't Muslims involved. And a number of other of these terrorist attacks, which were all supposedly carried out by Muslims. I'm not saying that there haven't been individual Muslims who've done bad things, but I've got a strong suspicion that was all carried out as false flag attacks in order to probably to fulfill a number of aims, to pass new anti-terrorist legislation, to clamp down on our freedom and the rest of it, but also to prepare the ground for what is happening now, and for people thinking that Muslims' lives don't matter at all. Then, as you said, they're sort of the Untermensch of our age that nobody was going to want to defend.
Yeah, well, I've got my opinion as an ex-Muslim. So I'm not a fan of Islam, but I'm not a fan of Christianity or Judaism or any organized religion. That's my take on it now, right? I think all religions are captured by man and are about guilt, shame, and control. And I don't need religion to believe in God, to worship God, to have the divine within me. And I just don't need that. I don't need a priestly class telling me how to worship and be a good person. They're all hypocrites. So many of them are hypocrites. Just look at what happened during COVID and had to shut the churches and where all the imams disappeared to. So when I criticize Islam, I criticize all of them. I'm not a fan of any of them. And Islam is so close to Christianity and Judaism. It's ridiculous. It's like they're siblings. People don't realize, Muslims believe in the virgin birth. They believe in Mary being a very holy figure. They believe in Jesus being the Messiah. They believe that he died on the cross. They believe he was resurrected from the cross. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Like, they're so close to Christianity. It's crazy. Probably even closer than Jews are. Like, Jews rejected Christ. Jews don't believe that he was born to the Virgin Mary. They don't believe he was resurrected from the cross. So what I'm trying to say, Muslims and Christians are incredibly close. But that doesn't mean I'm a fan of the religion and elements of some of their culture. So that I just want to make that clear. But the thing is, in the last 50 years, there's been a radicalization of Islam, and it's been promoted by the West. The main religious sect, Wahhabism, is promoted and upheld by the Saud family, who are the benefactors of Britain and America, who've propped them up. And any country like Bahrain, which is a Shia majority, when they try to overturn the ruling Wahhabi kind of like sect, they get clamped down. They get supported by the West. And, it's funny, the democratic secular leaders have always been overthrown. The nationalist leaders have been overthrown, like in Egypt or Syria or Iraq. And, so the nationalist kind of secular leaders are overthrown, but then the radical fundamentalist religious zealots, they get promoted and protected. And it's like, what's that all about? And same with in Palestine, you had the PLO downgraded. It had Christians and Muslims and people from all different faiths and backgrounds in it. But they were got rid of, and in replacement, you got Fatah and Hamas and these religious organizations, and they were promoted again by Israel because it's easier to say we're not going to negotiate with Muslim fundamentalist terrorists than say we're not negotiating with a secular, multi-ethnic group of people. You create the boogeyman, and then you can justify great evil against them. And then, the last point I wanted to make was, in the last 50 years, we've caused so much death and mayhem in the Middle East and North Africa, whether it's Libya, whether it's Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. We have killed millions, and maimed millions and traumatized millions. And despite that, Muslims want to come to Europe, like they're not, because they're running away from the evil, and also because NGOs backed by certain people like Soros are facilitating their transfer into Europe. So it's not the Muslim migration is a problem, I believe, because it's too much and it's overwhelming local communities and cultures. But it's not little Billy Bilal that's the fault. It's the people who bombed their countries and then paid the human traffickers and the NGOs who are bringing them over here. It's a lot more complicated and nuanced, isn't it?
Of course it is, yeah. Of course. And moving people around the world is a favourite trick of the sort of the imperial ruling class. They love to send people into a country to help destroy what was there already. I mean, I'm thinking, the obvious example is North America, isn't it? They sent all the Europeans in, and Australia as well. People were sent out there for having stolen a loaf of bread or something. They were deported to Australia because they wanted white settlers to come in and and take the place over, wipe out the indigenous people, put them in reservations, which is pretty much the same as putting them in concentration camps in a way. And it's always been used, and you can see now that I think there is some sort of instrumentalization of immigration to break down societies, to destabilize, European countries, to.
I mean, just look at Africa. Sorry for interrupting, but there's a huge number of Indians in East Africa, in South Africa, and they came over as indentured slaves, or they were, encouraged to get out of India and then work out there. So you've got, like, for example, in South Africa and Central America and everything. The reason why there's such a varied population is just that they're used as slaves, cheap labor force, disrupt the local population, and supplant them. And they have been doing this for quite a long time.
Yeah, it's part of the modus operandi. So people they're not interested in people as individuals, as human beings with rights. They're just, we're all just little pawns on their board, really, and they'll move people there and here, and play them off against each other. Divide and rule, obviously, is important, rather than.
But this was happening before the Zionist imperial mafia. So I'll give an example: the Irish. So the Irish were conquered and enslaved, and someone might argue that they were the first white slaves. They were the first slaves. Some people in England say, no, we were the first slaves. The English were enslaved. But if you look at the English, they went over to Ireland. They culled like hundreds of thousands of people died, men. And then the women and children were then sent off to Americas. And the City of London Corporation asked, can't remember which king, we want some, people to go over to America. And he went, oh, no, don't worry, we'll give you plenty. Anne McCloskey's written about this on our Substack. But the Zionists weren't there. It's just the playbook is there, though.
Well, they weren't called Zionists then, but they were still the
money people.
The money was still there. I mean, I read recently. Just somebody sent me the link, but it was the English Heritage site, the historical institution, and they were writing about. It was about York. Anyway, I won't go into all the details, but they were talking about the Norman conquest in 1066, and about how the invasion and the occupation of England by the Normans, which involved building castles around the country. I mean, you've probably all seen a few.
Yeah.
And that was financed by Jewish moneylenders from Rouen in Normandy, and it was this. This was one of the reasons why there was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment in Britain in the Middle Ages. It's because they were associated with the occupation by the Normans, which was seen by many as a loss of Anglo-Saxon freedom, loss of ancient freedoms, the Norman yoke, they called it for many centuries. So it's not I mean, they didn't call themselves Zionists. Zionism hadn't been invented, but there's a certain continuity there over the centuries, which surprised me. I didn't know about that until recently.
I read that the Jews were expelled from England in the 1200s or something.
Yeah, subsequently, yeah. I mean, partly because of that. Partly because of that, I think. And
that was for about 400 years.
They came back. Oliver Cromwell invited them back in. He was financed partly. Well, the City of London. You were talking about this. The City of London already then was. He was financed by Dutch Jewish moneylenders, as was the so-called Glorious Revolution slightly later, when the William of Orange was funded by Jewish bankers. And so this is going back a long time in British history. And when Oliver Cromwell was a protector or Lord Protector, or whatever he called himself, when after the English Civil War, when the king was killed, Charles II was killed. Yeah, was that Charles II? Anyway, when King Charles was beheaded and Cromwell took charge, that was when British imperialism really took off as well. I mean, it had already started, but it was during under Cromwell that Jamaica was taken over by Britain, for example. And there's a strong connection between imperialism and money, obviously, because it wasn't just about taking over the world just because we wanted to, and it wasn't just for the honour of for planting the flag. It was to go out there and extract wealth from all over the world, and and ship slaves around and the rest of it. In fact, British imperialism was the start of the thing what we now call globalism or globalization. Then it's taken on various forms. So you can see it's more or less the same entity behind it.
Is it the same entity, or is it just the same playbook? So what I mean by that is Teresa Coraggio has written a book about how to dismantle an empire. She talks about it in her early opening chapters about how, if you go back even to ancient Greece and how they would treat the locals and where democracy came from, it's all an illusion, because you had these archons where you get the oligarchy and all that kind of stuff. That archy means rulers. You had these archons who ruled Greece, and when the low people, the farmers, peasants, people who didn't have land, started to rebel, the archons gave the people who had a little bit of land the idea that they had a voice and a vote, and divided the group that was rebelling. So the people who had no property or rights, they were just dismissed. They were now no longer fighting along with the farmers. And the farmers and the small landholders now fought on the side of the archons because they believed that they actually had power now through democracy. But it was all controlled on an illusion of power being transferred to them. The archons maintained their power and just basically did a sleight of hand. And one of the things that happened in ancient Greece was that they promoted the idea of conquering their neighbors and enslaving them. And so you had the slave market system where you exploited the countries and peoples around you, and then the money and the resources through taxation came back, held centrally by these archons. And they weren't Jewish, they weren't Zionists, but it was a slave system. And then that slave system and that money transfer and indebted system and taxation was modeled by all the European states and Rome and everywhere else. So what I'm trying to say is, could it just be there's just a playbook of how bad people do bad things and corrupt systems and exploit other people? Because that's what colonialism was. It was just enslaving other people abroad and transferring that wealth back home. But everybody along the way was still, even the slave master was a slave to the money people. What I mean by that is, like, for example, in the plantations, Teresa talks about this in the book. People who were transferring the slaves in the ships, they were one bad business away from bankruptcy and going to jail and being murdered by the bankers back home in Europe. If one ship sunk in a storm, that was it. Their margins were always tight. They're always stressed out, thinking, are we going to be able to make the money to pay off our debts? So that was the slave ships. Then the slave owners in the plantations, they were always one harvest away from bankruptcy and also going to jail. So it wasn't just the slaves that were victims. Everyone along this conveyor belt was in fact a slave. Just because you held a whip didn't mean that you were not still the slave. The only people that didn't really lose anything and made all the money were the bankers.
As ever.
And so what I'm trying to say is, maybe it's just a system. Maybe it's not a group of people. Maybe it's not a religion. Maybe it's the system. And whoever figures out that system at the time and does well at the monopoly board takes over. And right now, at this moment in time, it's the Zionist mafia.
Yeah, obviously human history has gone on for many millennia now, and there must have been very evil and corrupt people in the past. But I think we have to focus on who is in charge now.
Okay.
And, by whatever means they've seized control, and while they've surely have learnt from playbooks of the past, they've pushed it to new extremes of criminality. In my opinion, what we're seeing today is there's a complete contempt for all of us in the behaviour. Even under COVID, a lot of people came to that conclusion just through COVID. There's complete contempt for our lives, for people's lives, when people were separated from their loved ones when they were dying, and children's education was wrecked, and there was we were told we weren't allowed to go outside in the sunshine. What sort of twisted individual? It's sadistic. It's sadistic behavior. It's not just about making money or being rich. In fact, I've been thinking recently, I wouldn't bother me if there were rich people who lived up on the hill and I wasn't as rich as them and they just got on with their lives. And I knew they were having champagne every night, and I didn't, well, I don't care. I don't even like my champagne very much, actually. So, but the point is, they don't leave us alone. They keep encroaching every year, or there's always something else they want to take away. They want to, there's a nice bit of countryside near where you live, and they want to build on it, or they want to stop you from doing this, or they price you out of doing certain things, and and inject you with different substances, and and they just leave us alone, but they won't, and that's what's intolerable to me.
I hear you, brother. I hear you. I mean, honestly, that's what I just say. Leave me the frack alone. And like you, I don't actually care if they've got all the money and I think most billionaires are actually quite miserable. Good for you. Like, you got your billions. Wealth isn't just monetary. Wealth is health. I recently just got over 2 bouts of illnesses. So one was a slip disc prolapse at C6 and C7. And I can tell you right now, Paul, I went through hell. Mate. It was really dark. And as I lay in bed, not finding any position of comfort, nothing, searing agony down my arm, I felt, do you know what? Nothing is more valuable than a good night's sleep, pain-free. I wouldn't trade billions for this. You can keep all the money and all the yachts and all the land. If I can't sleep comfortably at night, what's the point? What's the point? And then I had a bout of labyrinthitis where I had the worst vertigo. And I don't know if you've ever had that. It's awful. You get up and suddenly the world is spinning. You can't get off the floor. You're puking your guts out. So what I'm trying to say is, health is wealth. If you've got an ability to walk pain-free, to eat, to see, to hear, to not live in chronic pain and agony, and to sleep a good night's sleep, you are rich, my friend. And then if you have love in your life, where you can love your children and your grandchildren and see them smile and see them do silly things and make funny comments, you are rich, my friend. And then if you have the ability to love someone, maybe in a hot girl, and she loves you back, oh man, that is wealthy. That is to have that companionship, to have someone rub your shoulders in the evening when you're tired, to share a meal with. Fucking hell. And then if you've got friends that you can count on, that you can lean on when you're down and when you need help, fucking hell, you're rich. This is true wealth. And I think as a society, we've forgotten what wealth actually means. And we focus on monetary wealth to the exclusion of all other types of wealth. And that also includes spiritual wealth, all this other kind of stuff. Sorry for the rant.
No, you're completely right. I agree with all of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we need to reevaluate what we're doing here and what we think is important. I think as a society, as a civilization, we need to say, well, what are we doing? Why are we walking into this horrible, dark place, this future that looms up ahead of us?
Absolutely.
When it's such a wonderful world and we've got everything we need to lead happy, fulfilled, creative lives. And
that's the thing. I think just that point you made, that the intrusions, I'm just tired of that. That's why I'm doing this podcast. It was like when I was a doctor, don't tell me how to practice medicine. Don't tell me how long I need to speak to my patient. Don't tell me whether I can operate on them or not. Don't tell me what tests I can use. Everywhere they were telling me. So I left NHS, went private. And the insurance companies were telling me, oh, don't see your patients. Don't operate on them. Don't do the test. Don't do the scan. And, and then I would speak to the physiotherapist and they'd be like, well, we're being told as well by the insurance companies that we can't spend more than this much time and we can't see them more than this number of occasions. And everywhere, the money people, the insurance companies, the government or whatever, because it all comes down to the money, are telling us what to do, how to think, where to go, what to eat, what to inject inside us, and where we can travel to, what we can build. And it's like, shut up. And you just need to look at all the legislation that's passed. None of it really is written by MPs. It's written by lobbyists and God knows who else for their agenda. All these laws and acts and legislation are passed. And it's like, I don't need this. Like, it should be simple, natural, God-given laws, which is like, first, do no harm to anyone else. Take no shit from anyone. Just be your own. Like, I don't care what people do in their own home and property. I should be allowed to do whatever I like in my property. If I'm not harming myself or anyone else, that's fine. Just don't tell me what to do. But everything, we are constantly being monitored, instructed, indoctrinated, and that to me is against freedom, and I can't stand it.
Yeah.
Annoys me.
Yes, and so it should. But we've got to get together, everyone, not just me and you. I don't think that'll be enough of us, and say no. We're not having this anymore. We want our lives back. We want our future back. We want to live out as we want, not as you say. Why do we have to take any attention to them? Who appointed these people to decide everything? They claim it's a democracy, which obviously isn't. But where do they come from?
Like, for example, there's been talk about the government wanting to spend money experimenting to dim the sun, and it's like, hold on one second, we just had an election. Where the fuck was that mentioned? Who in this country in their right mind wants the sun dimmed? Like, we've been craving the sun for over a year. We've just had it now for a few weeks, and we're all over the moon and delighted. And plants are now blooming. Life has returned to the earth. And you want to dim the sun? I mean, are you mad? I mean, that's an example of, like, democracy is just a sham. Like, no one's voted for this, and we don't have the ability to say no. And that's what happens every single time. These assholes, whether it's in the local council or in Westminster or in the EU or in the UN or Davos, these assholes make decisions that none of us want. We don't, like, I don't want, why, like, the head of the armed forces is an admiral right now. Why is he sending 500 or 5,000 RAF flights over Gaza and Israel and giving intel to the Israeli forces so that they can bomb the Palestinians? Why are they doing that? I don't want my taxpayers' money spent like that.
Of course not. But they're never going to ask you. They're never going to ask us if we went all that, because they know what we'd say. We'd say no, and then it'd be embarrassing, because they'd have to just, it'd be more obvious that they were just trampling over public opinion, like with the Iraq War. When there were millions of people out on the streets.
Millions.
It was quite obvious that British people didn't want a war in Iraq, and then they did it anyway. No, that's not democracy, is it? That's just somebody pretending to be a democracy. I'm afraid that's what it is. It's a sort of a disguised tyranny, really. And the whole of the planning system as well is part of it. I mean, I won't go into it all now, but I've looked at that, because supposing they want to build houses all over a field down the road from here. Well, everybody's against it. Well, they say, no, we're sorry, because we've got to build a certain number of, or allow the building of a certain number of homes by property developers, obviously, over the next 5 years, because it's in the local plan. Well, where did that come from? Well, that's under the structure plan for the whole county or the region or whatever, however it works. And who says that there's got to be more and more of this?
Right.
Well, we know nobody asked us, or and it's just like it's come down from God or something. That there must be development, because development is the way forward. What is
progress?
Yes, it's progress, but it's just profiteering, isn't it? It's just making more and more money. The growth of the economy doesn't mean the growth of our collective well-being or prosperity. It means the growth in the profits and the power of the corporations and the financial institutions which call the shots and which create these planning structures. And
so how do we snap out of this, because what we want is decentralization. And the picture I paint is, imagine a world where you can do pretty much everything you want without harming anyone else. And it's just your life, where you pay 1% tax to your local council to, maintain certain things. But, if there's a road that's got potholes, you all divvy up together and you pay for it, like it used to be in the old days, where, things like the greatest explosion in infrastructure and engineering in the UK was done by the private sector during the Victorian era. People have these ideas, like, what's the best infrastructure that we've got? All the bridges and drainage, aqueducts and everything. It's all during the Victorian era and Brunel and whatnot. And that was all private. The railways, all private. It's better when it's done privately than when it's done by the government. And the government is just cronyism, because they take the wealth from the taxpayer and then give it to their little friends in the private sector. It's crony capitalism. This public-private partnership now that we've got. What you want is decentralization. And imagine like 99% of your taxes went out the window. Imagine how much more money you would have. Imagine what you would then do, how much more time that would free up in your life to then say, maybe today I'm not going to work. I'm going to sit in the garden and enjoy the sun. I'm going to spend time with my grandchildren. I don't need to pay for a babysitter, a nanny or childcare anymore. Maybe one of us doesn't need to work out at all to pay the bills. I mean, just imagine your quality of life, how it would improve if you didn't have to pay all that tax. That's a life that is very much possible, isn't it? Because 150 years ago, there was no such thing as even income tax or inheritance tax or council tax or any of these things. I mean, but we've got used to it. We've got used to this system where we're just constantly indebted, constantly. And we are now just indentured slaves. People don't realize. So that's the system. So I say, well, the alternative is to be free, not to have this. And just imagine that. Why can't we fight for that? But I think there's a limitation in people's imagination. They can't actually even physically comprehend such a world.
Probably not. We're very conditioned throughout our lives. We're conditioned to think that this is just perfectly normal. And this is I think something you notice as you get older, you notice the encroachment that I was talking about. So you notice that you're losing things that you did have, even though, you were born in a certain condition that perhaps you thought society was normal at the time when you were a child, but it was probably already well down the line towards something undesirable. But if as you get older, you do notice that it's getting worse. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, but I think society has got worse permanently since I was old enough to notice. Since I became a teenager or whatever. So there is some scope for people understanding. I think when certain events happen, like COVID, for example, and that opened a lot of people's eyes, and not just to what was happening during that so-called pandemic, but also to the real nature of our society and the real lack of democracy and and so on and so forth. So there are possibilities for people seeing through it, but overall, the general way we live is held to be just the way it is, and people think it was always like that as well. They don't realise that we weren't, like you just said, that there weren't taxes on everything, and two people didn't have to work in a household just to keep
just to make ends meet.
Yeah, which is the case now, isn't it? It wasn't the case, and in the Middle Ages, I've read stuff about the Middle Ages, so they didn't. We think the peasants worked, it's just like slaves working away from them. They actually didn't work that many hours, they didn't work they didn't always have to go and work for the, even under the feudal system, they didn't have to put all their time into working for the Lord of the Manor. It was just occasional days, and they didn't, and there were a lot of holidays in those times, there was always the saints' days, and they enjoyed life more. They were able to enjoy more freedom then than now. And yet the picture we're painted today, most people think the Middle Ages was everybody was poor and suffering. And, you see films, everyone's covered in mud. Everybody's covered, writhing around in mud, surrounded by pigs and sort of being really sort of barely human. But of course, Middle Ages was the era when in Europe, the great Gothic cathedrals were built, and that's, to me, that doesn't speak of a backward and barbaric civilization.
100%. How's that possible? How did they build all that beautiful architecture and everything? Yeah, it doesn't fit. And honestly, I've got to the point where I don't trust anything we're told about history anymore. I don't believe anything. Everything's just bullshit. It comes back to, that opening line that I came out with, when I was reading from the Winter Oak, when, everything we're told if it's in the service of the lie. I think history is very much corrupted, and God knows now what the real truth is. But listen, look, Paul, we're going to be coming to an end soon, but what are the solutions? That's what people really want to know. Like, we talk about the problems, and a lot of people listening to this will be listening going, yeah, we can relate to this, we understand. But how do we crack out of this? Like, how do we get out of this? I think part of it is definitely that the money system is a problem, the fiat system. They can print as much money as they want, have as much control. And now they've got all the resources, got all the money, got all the power. And to me, I think what they're doing now is bringing in, like you said, this encroachment is the control grid mechanism, so that we will never be able to break free and revolt and rebel and overthrow them. And they can just have us caged like zoo animals. So how do we break free from all of this?
I think the first thing to do is to make people aware of the situation. We keep saying in the course of this conversation that people don't know, people don't understand. I don't think we can expect people to act if they don't know why they're acting and what they're acting for or against. So though it might seem like I'm not proposing a solution by saying that we should expose the situation for what it is, I think it's a necessary prerequisite before anything else can happen. Otherwise, we're all just running around in circles, thinking that it's about left again or right, or that such and such a political leader is going to change everything. We'll be saved, and it's just they like it that way. They like it that people are running around in the fog, attacking each other because they think, oh no, the problem is it's them over there. It's the other little people. We need to get people to look up and see what this is above us. This system that is actually trying to really enslave us to an even greater extent than it already has managed to do so. So that's to me. I can't see much beyond the need at the moment for making people aware of the true grave extent of our predicament.
I agree. I'm going to read a little bit more of Mike Driver's post, if that makes sense, and then if that's all right. And then I'm going to ask you my final question, my friend. So I love it. He goes, 26, progress is a rebranding. We are Aztecs with a marketing budget. 27, all wars are lies. The ordinary human cannot conceive of war without prior deception. I think that's really powerful. And I think one of the biggest psyops, people talk about the big psyop of COVID, mRNA jabs. I think one of the biggest psyops is convincing mums and dads to send off their children to be slaughtered and say it's a good thing.
Yes, indeed.
I'm doing everything I'm doing because of my 3 kids that you can see up there. The idea that I would want them to go off to war to fight against other good people for no reason other than serving the bankers, it's just awful. I would never accept that. But so many parents are convinced that that's their patriotic duty and the right thing to do, to send their kids off to be slaughtered. What a psyop. What a deception.
Yeah, what a deception, and what a horrific satanic crime to murder millions of young people in whatever war we're talking about, First, Second World War, any wars still to come today. It's depravity beyond description for me, and unfortunately that's what we're up against. It's just not just some sort of vaguely benign ruling group or some slightly selfish ruling group or whatever. They're really deeply unpleasant and murderous, and I don't think we can put up with this.
There's definitely a spiritual element to this, isn't it? There's something very dark about this group of people.
Yes.
Yeah. Another thing as well is, I don't know what your point of view of this is. I've traveled a lot around the world. I think most people are really good people. I'm not saying everybody. Like, there's assholes everywhere. But there are assholes everywhere. Like, everywhere. Like, there are pedophiles everywhere. There are rapists everywhere. There are murderers everywhere. Most people, as soon as you just start talking to them, get to know them, they're really good people. They're not that different from us. Whatever color, religion, creed, whatever. And I think that's what people need to remember. And don't fall for the hating and othering. And that's whether it's the Palestinians, they're not Hamas terrorists. And that's whether they're Jews. They're not evil Jews. There's just a few bad people in every group. Yeah. Some people have more power than others, but there are bad people everywhere. And we need to stop hating and fighting our fellow man. Because the more older I get, I realize that God is literally within us all. And we are just fighting each other. We have so much in common. We are the same, ultimately.
Yes, we all have the same essence.
We're God's creation. We are all part of God. And we're all just fighting amongst each other like idiots. It's crazy. It's actually insane. Anyway, just a few more because I love this. Psychology, number 40. Psychology is deception dressed as a science. Freud was a fraud. I love that. I've got a friend who's a psychologist and she's so disillusioned. She's just trying to find a way out. She just doesn't believe in it anymore. 41. The soul is resilient. Nothing else has ever come under such relentless attack. And then 48. I mean, there's lots of great ones. I don't want to read them all. 48. We must turn the internet off. That's pretty important, isn't it? But this is important. Like, it's a double-edged sword. Like, we get our information out there by using the internet and technology.
Yes, we do at the moment. But I think he means, yeah. Well, I agree. We've got to come off that in the end. But maybe in the meantime, we'll use the enemy's weapon against it as much as we can. I think they'll be chucking most of us off the internet at some point in the near future, anyway. So.
49. We are surrounded by the continuous presence of the divine. I agree. All it asks is our attention. But we're distracted, aren't we? By the screens, by the media, the headlines, the celebrities, all that garbage and noise. You know, I used to really enjoy watching TV. And I used to think at the time that I didn't watch that much. But now where I am now, I realize how much time I used to watch TV and programs. And now it's impossible. I can't. I just find everything just so stupid, mundane, boring, mindless, numbing garbage. I'd rather just sit in my deck chair and relax and breathe and listen to the birds and smell the flowers of my wisteria than watch some crap on TV.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
And the last one I really like is 50. Love is all. All will be well. Do you think all will be well?
Yeah. Maybe not tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. It will be. Yes.
It'll all be well. Right. Final question of the day, my friend. On your deathbed, you're going to meet your creator soon. Before you pass away and meet your maker, what words of wisdom and advice would you give to all your loved ones and friends and family around your deathbed?
I would tell them to always be true to themselves, to be authentic, and to look inside themselves for who they are, and not to listen to other people telling you who you should be or what they want you to be. Because I think that's the only way I think that's the way we connect with the divine, actually. Although it seems to be outside us and beyond us, it's also within us. And it's through cutting through the surface of all the junk that surrounds us in our culture and all the received opinions that we're supposed to share. It's through cutting through that and going inside our own hearts that we make that direct connection with the divine, with something beyond ourselves, which should be what animates us, which should be what drives us in our individual existences.
Amazing. Just in case no one reads the show notes, where can people find your writings?
Well, the main site is winteroak.org.uk. That's where you'd find Mike Driver's article as well, for example. And my personal articles are also on Substack, Paul Cudanec, substack.com. I've also got another site which is more of a less current affairs. It's more philosophical, which is called Organic Radicals, orgrad.wordpress.com.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming. And yeah.
Thank you.
I'm really glad we were able to do this in person.
Yes.
Thank you. I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and/or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.